Morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Mike's MMA Picks Fight Morning Quick Card Breakdown Show, brought to you by BetDSI, as well as we also have a huge DraftKings contest with $100K going to the top scorer. Wish everybody luck out there tonight with those contests. Another reminder is that this is the last UFC that we have for 2 weeks. So make those lineups count. Best of luck this evening. Now let's kick things off. So first fight of the night, we have Sabina Mazo taking on Shana Dobson. This fight takes place in the women's 125-pound division. We haven't seen Shana Dobson in about 18 months, and she had been recovering from surgery. Dobson comes in at 8,200 in DraftKings. Sabina Mazo 8,000. Mazo right now sits as the minus 125 favorite. Dobson plus 105. Mazo came into the UFC riding a win streak where she saw some spectacular head kick knockouts in LFA, and we don't typically see that type of game translate to the big show, and that was evident in her first fight against Marina Moroz, who basically took her down, held her at bay, and dominated Mazo. Mazo's only 22 years old. She's spent the past 5 years at King's MMA, and Dobson, a fighter she's taking on here, fights out of Lloyd Irvin's camp. I believe Dobson's game may have developed in those 18 months. The same can be said for Mazo. This fight is expected to go to a decision at minus 350. You look at Mazo's frame, she can be manhandled in there. I have a hunch Dobson's going to be the one to do it. She's got to close distance. It's a recipe for disaster if Dobson wants to sit out on the outside. One thing I noticed when watching tape on Dobson is she likes to get inside and go to the body. She'll have to do the same against Mazo here. Danger 2.0. That's what she's proclaiming herself as, Miss Dobson. I'm going to pick her for the upset here, though this is a stay-away fight in a lot of respects. You have two fighters who are still developing, one with a significant layoff, and this is bottom of the barrel when it comes to women's MMA. Next up, second fight of the evening, we've got Brandon Davis taking on Kang. Kang has been in the UFC for a while. Back in 2013, he fought Alex Caceres. Kang coming in as a minus 195 favorite with an $8,900 DraftKings price. Brandon Davis, 7,300 plus 160 underdog. Brandon Davis fighting out of Team Alan Belcher. Alan Belcher, we remember his fights against Rousimar Palhares, Michael Bisping, etc. One of my favorite fighters. Jason Knight comes out of that camp. Brandon Davis has seen success after dropping down from 145 pounds. He's actually fought as high as lightweight in his career. So Davis is a striker, loves to engage in brawls, does not hesitate one bit. I actually will egg his opponent on to stand and bang with him, which could be a recipe for disaster against Kang, who likes to crack, also has a decent ground game. Now, we saw against Barzola the game plan for Kang should be to get this fight to the ground and hold Davis there and land a submission. Easier said than done. Davis went a couple of rounds with Sabina. He went the distance with Barzola, who, granted, doesn't like to go submission over position. In this fight, it is expected to go to a decision at -125. Both fighters have identical reach. Spent a lot of time digging into this fight. Brandon Davis is the younger fighter. Seems to be on the upswing here. Look good at weigh-ins. I'm gonna pick Kang to win, just because Davis, there's that deep wrestling hole in his game, and Kang can exploit that. That being said, Davis has the potential to come out here and be very aggressive and rack up lots of DraftKings points. So Kang's gonna be the pick here. I know you look at their records. Kang 15-8 record. You know, he came into the UFC off the Asian regional scene and seems to have improved his game. But this should be a very close fight. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to the scorecards. Give me Kang. Next up, we have a fight that's been talked about often on MMA Twitter. We've got Hannah Cifers taking on Jodie Esquibel. Jodie Esquibel sporting the 6-5 record, fighting out of Jackson Wink MMA. She comes into this fight with a 2-inch reach advantage, $7,000 in DraftKings, plus 230 underdog at the betting window, taking on Hannah Cifers, 9,200, minus 280 currently at BetDSI. Now, we got a few things in play here. You watch Jodie Esquibel's her stand-up. You watch her ground game. She's got heart. She throws with volume. And when you watch the tape, she shows you that she has grit. And if from a DraftKings perspective, you want to see those attributes to help score you points. Problem is that the person that she's fighting against typically is teeing off on her and is landing at a higher rate. So you go back and watch. There are two fights I recommend go back and watch. You go back to Invicta and take a look at a very green Alexa Grasso, 22 years old, taking on Jodie Esquibel. And Esquibel couldn't take Grasso down. Grasso basically had her way with her for 3 rounds. Look at Esquibel's face at the end of that fight. Hannah Cifers, although she doesn't throw massive volume, she's not afraid to get into the pocket and trade. This is a young lady who is incredibly strong, and I believe she's at 27 years of age, her stock is rising. I think a lot of the negative stuff that we're seeing out there, besides the level of opponents that she's faced, are due to her demeanor, the way she carries herself. She is very, very soft-spoken and awkward on the scales in interviews, but she has let her fists do the talking in the octagon and on the regional scene as well. This is a young lady who has multiple knockouts under her belt. Someone who came in on short notice and fought a Macy Barber who has a lot of things going for her. And, I mean, you look at the end of the fight, Cifers was a bloody mess, but she hung in there for about a round and a half. And in this fight, you have a Jodie Esquibel who is on the tail end of her career. Watch the weigh-ins again and watch the Media's Day stare-downs. Esquibel comes in with these 3 or 4 inch high heels on and is at Hannah Cifers' forehead. The reach isn't going to be an issue. I think we're going to see Hannah Cifers come through in this spot. She's going to close the distance. In my eyes, she's going to close the distance. She's going to land the harder strikes. And by the second or third round, she had a good run earlier in her career, but Esquibel was supposed to come into that fight with the better striking. And Esquibel was piecing her up. That can't happen against Jessica Aguilar at that stage of your career. So give me Hannah Cifers. The line has widened here. Give me Hannah Cifers to take home the victory here. The odds to go to a decision are minus 450. Pretty wide. Next up, another hotly contested bout between Manny, Bermuda Triangle, Bermudez, against Casey Kenney. Yeah, Casey Kenney comes into this fight. He's a guy who has spent a lot of time at 125 pounds, was a double champ in LFA, then came up to the UFC, got the short notice call against Ray Borg, performed extremely well in that fight against Ray Borg, who came in overweight. Casey Kenney, 7,800 plus 130 underdog. Manny Bermudez, 8,400 and minus 150 right now. The line has widened for Manny Bermudez, and I believe that's due to the catch weight that they've implemented. The UFC set this into place to avoid a horrific weight cut. Manny Bermudez, 14-0, only 25 years old. And Casey Kenney's only 28. So these guys are relatively young. Both have very promising careers in front of each other. Casey Kenney, 12-1-1. Casey Kenney, when you watch the tape on him, he is a southpaw who looks very fluid on the feet. Dynamic striker, is very comfortable on the ground, has that Division I wrestling background. I believe he went to school in Indiana. Manny Bermudez, although he has a 14-0 record and he possesses some slick submissions, he looks very lanky on the feet, does not look athletic at all. I believe it was Albert Morales who was tuning him up on the feet recently. And we didn't get to see a lot in the Benito Lopez fight. The Grant fight, went in, did what he had to do, got the submission. There are a couple of factors in play here. The weight is an issue. 140 pounds is going to help, or should help, Manny Bermudez tremendously. All he needs is to grapple, get a hold of a neck, find the back. Or if Kenney's in his guard, throw up that triangle like we've seen in the past. That's where he has a gift. Kenney's going to have to really, really work hard in this spot. Come in with a very safe game plan. And while I watch the tape, also I see something that jumps out at me is Bermudez tends to slow down in fights. So in my eyes, it's first round submission or bust for Bermudez. Now in DraftKings, that might be a godsend. You may be able to get away at 8,400 with a first round finish, some grappling points. But if that doesn't happen, Casey Kenney has a few paths to victory here. He does throw hands, and he can scramble on the ground. He was on the ground against Ray Borg for 3 rounds. Ray Borg's got some sick grappling. And initially, I was favoring Bermudez when this fight was announced. Then the weight cut. I saw Manny Bermudez come in. He looks like he's just as big as he was in the past. I've seen the interviews. He's been at the Performance Institute trying to get his weight under control, but it just doesn't look like it's happening. I think the weight cut is going to be the 140-pound weight agreement is going to be a major factor here. So I wish this fight was taking place at 135 pounds. I would actually go so far as to pick Kenney to win the fight if they both made 135, 136. But this, in my eyes, is a toss-up, and I'm going to lean Manny Bermudez, but Casey Kenney is as live a dog as it gets. Next up, we have Drakkar Klose taking on Cristos Giagos. This is in the men's lightweight division. Giagos coming in at 7,200, and we have Drakkar Klose coming in at 9,000. Drakkar Klose minus 170 currently at BetDSI, plus 150 for Giagos. Giagos coming in with the 1.5 inch reach advantage. Giagos a 17-7 record. Hasn't had the most impressive run in the UFC. Whenever he's left the UFC and gone to the regional scene, he's racked up a few wins. Fought some stiff competition. Took a loss early in his career to Chris Wade. Showcased his wrestling in that fight. Got out-wrestled at times. Fought Charles Oliveira. Got subbed in that spot. Showed decent showing against Hirota. Outworked Hirota. Then faced Damir Hadzovic. I was very impressed with that fight. He's been putting in some serious work at Black House. Seems to have got his cardio under control, which was a huge issue in past fights. Now, Drakkar Klose has left the MMA lab. He's gone to Fight Ready, Scottsdale, not too far away. Drakkar Klose, 10-1-1 record, came onto the scene, and I believe he upset Diaz-Casey in his fight. Also fought hard against Lando Venata. Had a very strange showing against David Timur, where he just did not want to engage. He was outmatched on the feet striking. Giagos isn't going to bring that high-level striking in this fight. So, in my eyes, what's going to happen here is this fight's going to be ugly. We're going to spend a lot of time against the cage and the clinch. These guys are going to be battling for underhooks. And we're going to see a number of reversals here. This fight has a split decision written all over it. I believe it is going to go to a decision. Right now, odds to go to a decision sit at minus 265. And I am going to lean Drakkar Klose. To me, he seems like the the better athlete, the more well-refined fighter. And what's shocking to me also is that Drakkar Klose is actually the older fighter. He's a couple of years older, 31 years old. Giagos is 29. But it may come down to the striking. And I believe Klose has a little bit of an edge there. So, grappling-based fight, and I believe it will come down to the strikes that are landed on the feet. Here we go. Next up, we've got Raphael Assuncao taking on Cory Sandhagen. Men's 135-pound division. Cory Sandhagen fighting out of Elevation Fight Team in Colorado. 8,700, minus 205 favorite. Raphael Assuncao, you talk about a guy who's he's had a raw deal for the UFC. 7,500 plus 170 underdog. This guy has beat, look at his resume, he's beat the who's who. Rob Font, Aljamain Sterling, Marlon Moraes, TJ Dillashaw. 27-6 record. Steady as he goes. He's one of the most defensively sound fighters you'll see out there, and it's funny that I mentioned that in the same breath that I mentioned Marlon Moraes finishing him inside the distance. So there may be a chink in the armor there at 37. He's starting to get up there. I believe he is starting to slow down. Assuncao, one of the nicest guys in the sport. Class act. Taking on Cory Sandhagen, who, I'll be honest, when he fought Austin Arnett, before he fought Austin Arnett, I wasn't too thrilled. I thought that Sandhagen's wiry frame would come back to cost him, that he would get out-grappled. In the Alcantara fight, he got dropped, caught in an armbar where he just wouldn't tap, and showed how flexible he is. And that dude's got rubber arms. Pretty incredible in that fight. Also, when I was doing the Beyond the Odds articles for MMA Odds Breaker, I dug very deep into Cory Sandhagen and his mental approach to fighting. And after he suffered his first loss, he started really trying to address the psychological aspect to fighting. And he self-admitted that was a major component to his success. So it's nice to see some humility from fighters, and for him to talk about that, and then you look at his resume and you see the guys that he's beaten. To go in there against John Lineker and perform the way that he did, I had to play on Sandhagen in that fight, speaks volumes. He's not afraid to get into the pocket. He has tremendous cardio, and the key in this fight, I believe it's going to come down to volume. Sandhagen has a 3.5-inch reach advantage. He's only 27 years old. We've seen the line bounce around for Sandhagen. He'll be a staple in a lot of DraftKings lineups today. We need to just think about who he's fighting. Assuncao, he isn't just going to roll over. Assuncao here should not be overlooked. I'm going to be picking Sandhagen here. I believe he has the tools, the fight camp, the cardio, the the striking and the scrambling ability of Sandhagen has been really impressive, and he's shown that he's more than capable on the ground. Granted, he doesn't want to engage much on the ground with the Assuncao here. So give me Cory Sandhagen to get this victory. Next up, we have Devonte Smith, who has his third opponent coming to the plate. Khama worthy. Devonte Smith, 155-pound division, 10-1 record, highest priced fighter on DraftKings, minus 960 favorite. Taking on a Khama worthy who has been knocked out 5 times in his professional career. Go back and watch his loss to Kyle Nelson. He actually, Worthy actually fought Paul Felder on the regional scene. This kid, well, granted, he's not a kid. Worthy, much older fighter, 32 years of age, has nothing to lose. He said he is going to guarantee spectacular violence. 6,700 for Worthy, plus 635 underdog. This guy hits the slate is busted because Devonte Smith, I expect the ownership to be through the roof on him. Devonte Smith comes out guns blazing. These guys have shared in multiple interviews that they have had a significant history of training together and sparring together. And from my observations in the interviews, Devonte Smith was getting the better of Worthy in those exchanges. And it makes me wonder how many times Devonte Smith knocked Worthy out. Think about it. So this fight's not expected to go to a decision. Minus 475 was the odds last time I checked. The under 1.5 rounds opened at 160, then went up to 185, then went up to minus 200, then minus 215. Keep an eye on that. Give me Devonte Smith by stoppage. Smith, I believe, has 1 submission victory under his belt, but he should come through with a knockout here inside the distance. And when you're considering the highest price plays in the card, you have Sodiq Yusuff at 9,300. You've got Hannah Cifers at 9,200. You have Drakkar Klose at 9,000. Think about which fighter is going to come through at that range. And it's hard to get away from Devonte Smith. So give me Devonte Smith to finish inside the distance. Next up, we have a very, very intriguing matchup in the middleweight division. We've got Derek Brunson taking on Ian the Hurricane Heinisch. Ian Heinisch, 13-1 record. Fights out of Factory X in Colorado. 8,800 in DraftKings, minus 145 for Heinisch. 7,400 for Derek Brunson, plus 125 underdog right now. The odds have closed on this fight. One thing that jumps right off the page is Derek Brunson has a 7-inch reach advantage in this spot. Brunson's the older fighter, 35 years old. Brunson has fought the much stiffer competition here. He's been fighting out of Hard Knocks 365 with Henry Hooft. Ian Heinisch, tough as nails. We saw you can never count Heinisch out. He's a former state champion wrestler. We know his story about being incarcerated. What this is going to come down to is if Brunson can get Heinisch out of there. And I don't think it's going to be by submission. He'll have to knock Ian Heinisch out because in the late second and third rounds, Heinisch is going to be coming, and he'll reverse situations on the ground. He will not run out of gas, and this guy, you have to kill him in the cage to stop him or render him unconscious, which is going to be a challenge. I expect Derek Brunson to come out and win this first round. possibly handily, and then just fade late. The Theodoro fight did not tell me much. I saw a calculated Brunson, but Theodoro, he stood back. He gave Brunson the space to be tentative and patient. Heinisch isn't going to give him that space. He's going to put a grind on Brunson. And I was at Brunson's fight against Anderson Silva. We've seen Brunson falter under the bright lights. That was a winnable fight for Derek Brunson. This is a tough fight. I mean, I see Heinisch breaking Brunson in the later rounds and coming through with a win here, though that isn't a certainty. Brunson, in my eyes, is the more polished striker. Heinisch, you look at his fight against Carlos Jr. This guy, if his submission defense wasn't as good as it is, it would have been game over in that fight. He fought it against Ferreira, and on short notice, and really told us what he was all about, Ian Heinisch. So what he doesn't have in technique, he makes up for it in grit. And it may come down to that, but when you're also looking in DraftKings at the underdogs who may or may not come through, we need to be realistic here and give Derek Brunson a shot. If he fades late, it should be game over. This fight isn't expected to go to a decision at -130. I expect Brunson to win the early rounds and then falter in the end. So Ian Heinisch is going to be the pick here, reluctantly, because there are no certainties in this game, and I am giving Brunson a shot at winning this fight. Next up, we have a banger in the men's 145-pound division. We've got Sodiq Yusuff, another Team Lloyd Irvin fighter coming out with Dobson, taking on Gabriel Benitez, who fights out of AKA. Gabriel Benitez, 21-6 overall record, 6,900 plus 220. Benitez, 31 years old. When I watch Gabriel Benitez fight, I see a technician out there, a tactical fighter who throws a lot of left-sided strikes. Occasionally will throw some spinning stuff out there, but rather two-dimensional. Sodiq Yusuff should be more dynamic on the feet in this matchup. Sodiq Yusuff, 9,300, -270 favorite. Yusuff's only 26 years old. He fought Moraes, and in that fight, I was very impressed with the high-level striking that took place there. And I expect to see a similar performance against Benitez. Benitez doesn't take well to being struck. And in this spot, I think we're going to see Yusuff use his patience, use his range, and counter-strike. And that's going to be a difference maker here. This fight is not expected to go to a decision. Both of these guys have identical reach. Yusuff, 9-1, fought a hell of a fight on the Contender Series, and he also, I believe he broke his foot in the first round of that fight and showed us what he was made of. I think we're going to see Yusuff come through here in a decision victory. Benitez may hang around for a while at 6,900 in DraftKings, worth an extra look. the odds on this fight closed a little bit. So Yusuff by decision is going to be the pick. Next up, we have a hell of a matchup. This fight is worth the price of admission. In my book, we've got Yoel Romero taking on Paulo Costa. This fighter was originally booked over a year ago. At that time, I felt that Romero's, the way he sits back and lulls his competition to sleep and waits to pounce and then unload in bursts, was going to cost him against Costa. And a little over a year, I know Costa had the bicep tear, but I feel like this might be a changing of the guard here. Yoel Romero has been a staple at the top of those contenders at 185 pounds. Yesterday, he came in at 184.5. 8,600 in DraftKings for Romero, 13-3 record, minus 140 favorite. Paulo Costa, 7,600, plus 120 underdog. Paulo Costa has yet to taste defeat as a professional. This fight is not expected to go to a decision at minus 300. You look at Costa's fights, the way he fought Uriah Hall, patient. He knew he started eating shots in that fight, but he was fairly defensively sound against a dangerous opponent. It was like watching someone hunt someone. That's really what it felt like, and he you could see the confidence growing. And this guy will not get scared to fight Romero. He won't be intimidated. He's going to come out with guns blazing, and we're going to have to see Romero fight differently than he's fought in the past in order to have success. That's, I think, the key to this matchup. Costa is going to come out guns blazing, and how is Romero going to handle that? He can't just sit back and get teed off on in this fight. He has a tremendous wrestling pedigree, but he hasn't used it. And it's there. So maybe Romero has a game plan where he decides he's going to come and take down Costa and try to hold him here and wear him out. But I've yet to see that on a regular basis inside of the octagon. And the metrics don't tell me that that's going to happen. Right now, plus 120, I think is it's a dangerous price to pay for Costa against an opponent who Romero has gone deep into fights. He's been there in the third round, ready to unload on unsuspecting opponents. I got in at plus 165 and plus 140. And I'm going to roll with Costa Borrachina to get the upset victory here and shock the world. Romero, 1.5-inch reach advantage. Romero, he's alive. He's alive. He's a live favorite. He's not that. In some ways, I feel like he's the underdog coming into this fight because there are a few intangibles and things that aren't going his way, like that huge lawsuit. His age. Allegedly, he's 42. I have no idea if that's accurate. All of the years of wrestling under his belt. Dangerous fight. Should be a firefight. I'd prefer Costa inside the distance here at plus 200 or even higher. But give me Costa to get the win. I think his striking is just going to be too much. And we haven't seen him on the ground. But I'd like to see that play out. Now, co-main event of the evening. This is another tremendous fight. We've got Nate Diaz taking on Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis, 22-8 record, 32 years old. Nate Diaz coming in with the 4-inch reach advantage. Cesar Gracie, black belt, minus 135 favorite for Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis, Rufus Fort fighter. Typically, they come out with decent game plans. Now, Nate Diaz, 19-11 record. Haven't seen him in a few years. What can I tell you that you haven't already heard? You've done the homework on this fight. So have I. This fight is expected to go to a decision at minus 180. On the scales, we saw that Nate Diaz does look like he's in phenomenal shape. We know that Nate Diaz has a solid boxing game, has a slick jiu-jitsu game, has tremendous resiliency. We also know that Nate Diaz has a tendency to lose first rounds with ease. His striking defense is horrific. He doesn't handle leg kicks well. And I think that's going to be a huge component to this fight, is when Nate Diaz uses his reach advantage and he's looking to counter the kicks of Pettis. How is that gonna play out long term when this heads to the second and third round? Is Anthony Pettis going to be able to invest heavily enough that it will have a significant impact on the fight? We saw Conor McGregor come out and attempt those leg kicks in the past, and it didn't really play a factor late. You look at the previous fights too. You go back and, man, there's the whole Fight Pass library. You could watch all of these Diaz fights. He reminds me of a poor man's Tony Ferguson out there, and I'm not sold on Diaz's ability, but I am sold on his resiliency and his self-belief. Anthony Pettis is breakable. We've seen him break in many fights before. We know that although he's the far superior athlete, definitely the better kicker, he does have a great ground game himself. And I hope this fight hits the ground because I'd like to see how it plays out. But he's got a questionable gas tank. He doesn't handle pressure well. And he's there to be countered. The Wonder Boy fight didn't necessarily tell me that much. Anthony Pettis was losing that fight. That he pretty much lost all rounds up until landing that Superman punch off of the cage. So Diaz is a live dog here. The problem for me, and I haven't heard a lot of people mention this, but it's almost a certainty that Nate Diaz is going to be down around headed into the second round. So he's going to be behind the 8 ball early. And this is a 3-round fight. So my question is, does Nate Diaz have enough wherewithal to win rounds? Because I don't think we're going to see an increase in power due to the layoff. Now he's 34 years old. He typically peppers opponents, relies on volume, doesn't have a legitimate wrestling game. I'm leaning in this spot Anthony Pettis, but I see Nate Diaz as being as live an underdog as it gets. Anthony Pettis does have the potential to land a fight-ending blow, especially at 170 pounds. In the grand scheme of things, I have a hunch that we are going to see Anthony Pettis come out and stick to a game plan for 15 minutes unless something breaks. And we've seen his hands break in the past. We've seen his ribs pop out where he had to tap to Dustin Poirier. And if, and this is a big if Anthony Pettis is able to land those leg kicks early and to stay at range and fight the fight that Duke Roufus wants him to fight, I see him winning this. And as a minus 130 favorite, I'll be picking Anthony Pettis. But I also think as far as DraftKings goes, I mean, you want a guy who's going to put up volume for you, and you want underdogs who could come through. Nate Diaz is one of those fighters. So I'm not hating on folks picking Diaz in this spot because the blueprint is there to beat Anthony Pettis, and I see what people see in that fight. But I'm going to be picking Anthony Pettis in this spot. All right. Next up, we have the main event of the evening. We've got Daniel DC Cormier taking on Stipe Miocic. Now, rematch. This is another situation where what can I tell you that you don't already know? Man, we watched the replays. We've seen all the embeddeds. We've watched the tape. We've listened to the interviews. We've seen them on the scales. Both fighters come in much lighter, which leads me to believe that the quickness is going to be key here. I believe that Stipe Miocic is going to look to keep this fight at distance. He's going to use his range. He has a 7.5-inch reach advantage. Miocic is going to be 37 years old. Daniel Cormier, 40. Cormier had issues with his back, had issues with his hand. Cormier right now minus 140 favorite, 8,500 in DraftKings. Miocic 7,700 plus 120. Underdog. This fight's not expected to go to a decision at minus 350. You look at previous opponents for Miocic, and he has shined in the past. This fight, everything that I've seen and everything that I hear leads me to believe that Miocic is going to come out, look to be evasive, be the quicker fighter, and in the end, the third, fourth, fifth rounds, eventually he's banking on Cormier wearing down, showing his age, and then capitalizing on that. Eventually, the power shots being there to finish Cormier. When I watched the first fight, the replay, I noticed 3 or 4 separate instances where Miocic was on the verge of landing very heavy shots. And he seemed to be a little tentative, and he wasn't totally committed to his strikes. If he was, it pains me to admit this, but I believe that Cormier could have been in some big trouble there. And this speaks to Daniel Cormier's greatness. Daniel Cormier has overcome tremendous adversity, not only in his personal life, but also inside of the octagon. He's giving up height. He's coming in the heavier fighter in this spot, but when you look at the body composition, he's not the most muscular fighter. Similar to, in a way, we saw a lot of success from Fedor back in the day. It speaks to his grit and determination and willpower and wrestling ability and just fight IQ. In general, he knows how to win fights, and he's not He's not bashful about doing things in the octagon that is going to give him a competitive advantage. And the eye pokes, granted, we don't like seeing that, but you want someone who's going to fight for your money. And Daniel Cormier is going to fight like hell for your money. This is a very, very dangerous fight for Cormier. I honestly believe that this fight is as dangerous as a fight at light heavyweight with John Jones. And that speaks volumes. Miocic is a very dangerous fighter. He lost the first fight. He's ultra motivated, has a child. We saw him at weigh-ins. His kid was at weigh-ins. This is, in my eyes, the best Miocic we're gonna ever see. And Daniel Cormier is going to have to show us how great he is once again. One of my grandfathers, when my grandmother passed away, I was at the funeral, and my grandpa came up to me and he said, "Mike, you know, all good things come to an end." And he gave me a big hug, and that's something that stuck with me. We've seen Daniel Cormier come back from adversity time and time and time again, and this is a guy who basically has no ACL in one of his knees, and he's had back injuries, and he's been able to. I've never seen somebody do so much with less in their career. He doesn't have the physical attributes that most of the greats do, but somehow he's been able to do it. And that's why I think that's what makes him one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters of all time. And we're gonna see what happens tonight. I honestly believe this fight should be more closely lined than it is. And we have Cormier at -140 right now. I think this could be a pick'em right now. I'm gonna ever so slightly lean Cormier and pick Cormier to win in this spot. I wonder how much he has left in the tank. His body, it may give out on him inside the octagon. We haven't seen a fighter sustain an injury inside the octagon in a long time, and his body's held up while he's fighting. So I think what may happen here, we get to the second, third round. Cormier, if he does land the knockout shot, which that's one of Miocic's weaknesses, is his chin. We're going to see Cormier pursuing, and he's going to have to take advantage of it. And then the latter rounds, I'll be banking on Daniel Cormier coming through in dramatic fashion, whether it be somehow taking Miocic down and then finding his way to the back, or landing some ground and pound for a finish victory. But all eyes will be glued on this fight. I'm not counting Miocic out here, and this is what it's made for. So this is what we're tuning in for. Want to wish everybody the best of luck with their lineups tonight and the plays that they've made. It's been a pleasure putting these videos together. You can follow me on betmma.tips as well as CapperTech. This video has been brought to you by BetDSI and MMA Oddsbreaker. You can follow me at MikesMMAPicks on Twitter. Have a great day, everybody. Fabulous fight day. UFC 241. Go get it. Go get it, friends.